Talking about movies is often half the fun of watching movies in the first place. But that doesn't mean it can't get aggravating from time to time, especially when it comes to movies that leave a lot to the audience's imagination. People will always take what they will from a movie, since that's just the way perception and reality works, but when a film outright asks the audience to fill in the gaps of motivation, characters, story, or just plain old logic that it intentionally leaves blank, then I usually just mentally check out from the conversation afterward. Not because I don't have my own thoughts and feelings about such a movie, but because I find the endeavor of having such a conversation to be entirely fruitless. Best case scenario, you talk about what you thought a movie meant, and they agree with you. And then you just kind of shrug your shoulders and say, okay, wanna get Chipotle? The more likely outcome is that they don't agree, and then either the whole night is wasted going around and around and around until you arrive at the final destination, agreeing to disagree, or you just kind of shrug and say, okay, wanna get Chipotle? Very little is gained from having such a conversation because it really isn't much of a conversation. It's a one-way street where one person speaks their mind and the other is just left twiddling their thumbs to either agree and add or nod and pointlessly argue. It's a veritable cul-de-sac, and honestly, I think my time would be better used if I just stared at a mirror and argued with myself. To be fair, this is not the fault of the filmmakers. This is just human nature at its most insular. This is what I see, and I can only see what I see. It's nice when we're able to look outside our initial impressions and consider an outside perspective, but too often it's just a lost cause. However, avoiding the conversation altogether would also be something of a waste as well, because while it's likely this is the outcome, nothing is guaranteed. Just because I don't like having these non-conversations doesn't mean I shouldn't have them from time to time. Besides, I can't very well leave the Rose Bride waiting now, can I? Almost from the beginning of Anime Abandoned's existence, the 1997 anime series Revolutionary Girl Utena has always dogged me in the show, constantly being requested over the years, and particularly its 1999 film reimagining, Revolutionary Girl Utena Adolescence of Utena, or as it's known in the States, Revolutionary Girl Utena, the movie! I've avoided talking about Utena for so long because every time I was requested to do it, it was always done with the tone of, heh, let's see you make sense out of this. And it just killed whatever enthusiasm I might have had. But as the years went on, I guess I just decided to bite the bullet and go ahead and do it. Ultimately, I realized that while there were people who were basically daring me to talk about this, there were far, far more people who honestly just wanted a chance to talk about Utena. Also, the fact that some people treat the movie like it was the Cinnamon Challenge, well, that's not the movie's fault. And since we're lifting the curtain, so to speak, I didn't realize this until I was editing the previous episode, but if I could go back in time, I would definitely have made my Sage Must Die mode difficulty comment more blatantly tongue-in-cheek, because the last thing I want to do is pretend that what I have to say is the right opinion, especially with something as deliberately interpretive as Utena. Nor do I want to infer that talking about media in all its forms is something you win, like it's the world's most depressing carnival game. Maybe next time I'll include some direction with my script. But with all that being said, and after watching Utena, I do have quite a lot to say. Quite a lot. But no sense diving into the deep end when we could just simply dip a toe. Let's take it from the top. This is Revolutionary Girl Utena, the movie. Befitting a fairy tale, our story centers around a prince and a princess. Our prince is Utena Tenjo, a tomboyish teenager who just so happens to be a new transfer student at Otori Academy, or considering the amount of moving staircases, Hogwarts. Meanwhile, our princess is actually a bride named
Buttercup!
Anthe, actually. Rose Bride? Buttercup? Coincidence. Anyway, being the ominously titled Rose Bride, Anthe is, well, kind of like the number 2 headband. You have to fight to get it, and once you have it, you have to fight to keep it. Originally, the TV series had it that the possessor of the Rose Bride would one day gain the power to revolutionize the world, hence the name Revolutionary Girl Utena. This plot point was downplayed quite a bit in the movie, not necessarily for any story-related reasons, but well, that's just kind of what happens when your movie decides to have all the meaning and your main character turns into a car. We'll get to that. Not necessarily wanting to claim ownership of a fellow human being, Utena is understandably hesitant to join in such fights, but being compelled to act chivalrous in the face of outright detestable villainy is sort of what being a prince is all about.
She is the Rose Bride, and since I am the current champion, she's my possession!
But embracing her role as prince is all but inevitable for Utena, locked into place as she retrieves a sword from Anthy's chest, and thus we have a story. A pastel-colored sapphic love story that drips of symbolism and backstory that, well, you just kind of have to watch the series to get.
We can't go back to the garden where we were together. But you must believe me, you'll always be precious to me.
Just from the scant few details I've given all of you, you can probably tell that this story is going to be dense, let's say. But when you understand the creative forces behind Utena, you can kind of see what they're trying to do. Helming the series and the film is Kunihiko Ikuhara and longtime writer Yoji Yanakido. The two men had previously worked on the Sailor Moon series S and Super S, and from such a background you can start to jive to the magical girl coming-of-age story beat that they're laying down. And Aikido specifically has strong roots in many an anime coming-of-age story. Besides Sailor Moon, his work on Aran High School Host Club and Fulikuli are mined from similar veins as Utena. But ultimately, it is Ikuhara's vision that propels the story. That the film is called Adolescence of Utena should be clue enough what we're in for, if the literal translated title Adolescence Apocalypse wasn't on the nose enough. But with Ikuhara in the director's chair, it's kind of easy to overlook the narratively obvious, when the visually obvious demands the viewer's attention like a street busker lighting off fireworks. That being said, the cursory reading of the story of Utena being a 90-minute long metaphor for becoming an adult is only really one way of looking at the film, and that multitude of readings and angles is intentional on Ikuhara's part. Ikuhara is notorious for not giving straight answers to the questions his fans have posed, and he almost has a troll-like sense of humor about it. From giving out odd answers to just outright evading questions entirely, he plainly makes his case that Utena was meant to invite interpretation, going on the record that he doesn't want to narrow what people might take away by going too deep into his mindset. Ironically enough, that record being the director's commentary. One might argue that the last thing a director, who wants his work to be unadulterated by talking about it, would do, is record a commentary track ostensibly talking about his work. And true to form, he mostly just talks about the technical details of the film. That is, when he isn't sounding like he's trying to find the right key. To be fair, not every director can be like Kevin Smith and talk your ear off about anything and everything, but the point remains that Ikuhara just wanted a potluck and have the audience bring what they will to the table. It's obvious that the story of Utena and Anthy is a personal, intimate one, and the attachment that the audience makes with the story should reflect that. As such, the question that watching Revolutionary Girl Utena invokes is less, what do you think it means, and more, what does it make you feel? It's this kind of framing and involvement that has allowed Utena to have a life outside of the film and series, even 20 years after the fact. As I said before, I don't think this cultivates an involving discussion, but it does engender a sense of possession, as if a part of Utena belongs to you and only you. So if you'll all permit me a bit of selfishness, I'm going to do just that. I'm going to talk about what it made me feel, how it did it, and why. Needless to say, spoilers from here on out. First, I have to say that my initial impressions of the film were completely off, because whatever talk I heard about Utena the movie left out the parts where Ikuhara was basically making light of himself in the series. Thick, dense, nuanced scenes that are dripping with meaning, sandwiched between silly slapstick and fencing. As a film based off a TV series, it's all too apparent that a lot of the connecting scenes herein are done for the sake of satiating the core audience's expectations. I hazard to say fan service because that term has such heavy connotations, but when you think about what a fan of the Utena TV series would expect from a film adaptation, these are moments they would expect to see. Well, the fencing, at least. And further considering how much they impact the film's story, that is to say, little to none, It's hard to argue their place otherwise. Better yet, this entire animal scene happens towards the end of the movie and was preempted by the Shadowplay girls playing the wrong tape. So even Ikehara is just admitting that this is just a shitpost. I get the feeling that Ikehara wanted a place for them somewhere in the movie, but considering how polarizing Choo-Choo and Nanami are to the fanbase, he placed them in a segment that has crap all to do with the movie proper. Basically an admittance that yes, they're unpopular, but he wanted them in the movie anyway. By the way, shout out to the people curating the Utena wiki who backhandedly wrote, "Choo-Choo, to some viewers, is funny." Don't get me wrong, I don't find the scene itself funny, but I do find it funny that Ikehara had the gall to do it. And the fact that he had the ability to do it at all should be held with more importance. Making a film is not the same thing as making a TV series, as obvious as it might sound to say, but it holds especially true when it comes to creative freedom. Simply put, Ikehara had more breathing room to do what he wanted, and he did just that. To me, that creates an argument that the film is not only a worthy retelling of the story, but also a more definitive one, if such a title could be had. Yes, in terms of character work, the TV series has a stronger foundation, owing that to the expanded time allotted for a 39-episode series, and yes, the film is derivative of the series, and in some cases dependent upon the viewer having seen the series beforehand, but a serious question is begging to be asked. If Ikehara and company were able to tell their story the way they wanted to in the original television series, then why make a movie at all? Especially since it had little chance at making bonko bucks at the box office. Ikehara doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who goes back to the well without a good reason to, and the chance to retell Utena with more authority of what can and should be done is as good a reason as I can think of. Does this make for a better experience than the series? Not inherently, but I think it makes for a more telling experience, or at least a more bespoke one. To sum it all up, we may all bag on Ridley Scott for his endless director's cuts, but we sure did learn a lot about him as a creator by watching them. It's also for this reason that I didn't feel pressured to use the Japanese audio for this review, seeing as how Ikehara also oversaw the ADR back when Central Park Media picked up the license in the early 2000s. No matter what side of the sub versus dub argument you're on, I think we can all agree that if you can't be swayed to watch a dub by knowing that it was overseen by the original Japanese director, then you're not going to be convinced at all.
Let's rethink this. Why is that?
Do you have to ask?
Let's keep no secrets. Remember?
Bluntly put, a terrible dub would have killed this movie for English-speaking audiences, because this film really asks a lot out of its audience, and that's really hard to do if your actors are either half-assing it or are just playing out of their depth. But with that said, the film is still challenging, for lack of a better term. The film feels like it's throwing a lot at you with little regard to coherency or internal logic, after all. Even fans of the series would still need to take a moment here and there to pause the film and go, wait, what? And those are just the moments where Ikehara is just having fun. Yes, we're getting to it. Visually speaking, Utena has quite a lot going on, but there are several motifs that are running through the story that either hint at a character's fate or motivation. The most obvious being the film's use of color, the most predominant of which are red, white, and black. Reds especially saturate the frame, from red velvet curtains that drape across the interior shots to literal seas of red roses. It's almost as if the color of the canvas itself is red.
So many roses.
This is my rose garden.
Yours?
I'm the headmaster's sister, so I get special treatment.
But why red? Well, I think it's because it's the strongest contrasting color between white and black. Red pops equally against both, creating sharp contrast that can convey a thought and mood without much in the means of context. It's visceral and innately charged with emotion, but if red is the color of the canvas, then white would be the color of the subject. We typify white with notions of holiness and cleanliness, but by equal measure, we also equate it with death and mourning. White as a ghost, deathly white, and in Asian culture, these connections are even stronger. There are examples upon examples of white being used to signify death or deathliness in anime. The Hollow in Bleach, Excalibur in Soul Eater, even Light Yagami from Death Note is commonly seen wearing white. And as it relates to Utena, it's mainly used as foreshadowing. Toga, an elegant man who seems to have a past with Utena, is the one who informs her of the dueling fate around Anthe, and leaves her a single rose ring that signifies her participation in the duels called the Rose Signet, found in a dewdrop from a single white rose and a patch of red. White also conjures thoughts of cold and finality, like snow or ice on a winter's night, blanketing the ground and leaving only lifeless plants and trees sprouting from it. And sure enough, Toga's name roughly translates out to Winter Bud. As characters Toga and Shiori have intimate conversations, they are surrounded and embraced by white sheets, not unlike the kind you would throw over an old chair or mirror. We get an uneasy sense of both characters, that they are not of the waking world, even if we have seen Toga talking with Utena and Anthe. More than that, as Shiori listens to the story of Toga's traumatic childhood, White takes on a more menacing tone as it clings to the both of them, creating a chrysalis that houses their shared misery and sorrow, birthing a new sadness, clad in white butterflies' wings. While we're here, having a scene where a boy's innocence is killed while being in a cabbage patch? I think I see what you did there, Ikahara. Really? Care to explain? Well, I think it's a grim use of dramatic irony of a boy's childhood taken away from him in a story about growing up, contrasted by a setting that was popularized in 19th century France as to where baby boys came from. I mean, I think it has some validity because the legend also states that baby girls are found in the roses, and Anthe and Utena find each other in a rose garden.
Oh, come on, you didn't know that, you looked it up.
Suave, how would I know that without looking it up?
Shut up and let me hate you.
But while red and white are used to saturate the frame and give it a felt presence and meaning, black takes on a more characterful role, even going so far as to become a character in of itself.
This is Eco's and Efco's live radio coverage!
Befitting the anonymity that black affords these characters, all of them are bereft of a proper name. They are instead given a series of generic titles that are often used in anime scripting. If you don't remember me talking about this in my Project Eiko review, if you give a line to an extra, specifically a female one, then the protocol is to give them a generic title. Eiko, Biko, and so on and so forth down the alphabet. Hence why we have characters like Eco, Fco, and Seco, who aren't really characters, but rather personified narrative devices meant to keep the story from completely going off the reservation.
What's going on? The black cars are increasing in number. You know that bad things come in packs.
I said completely off. While it is common practice for anime to have faceless, featureless characters, the use of black seems especially noteworthy and harks back to stagehands in kabuki theater called kuroko. Dressed from head to toe in black, they were used to move the stage's setting around and aid in costume changes. Because of their garb, they were assumed to not be part of the action, and therefore were outside of the narrative itself, there to just make sure the scene is set, not unlike the function the Shadowplay girls ultimately serve. Incidentally, it's been theorized that this is where we got our modern interpretation of the ninja, because historically speaking, they just wore peasants' clothing because how else would you hide in plain sight? So it would go on to explain why we would suddenly think that they wore black all the time.
Okay, now you're just showing up.
Still, beyond the film's use of color and even beyond the rose imagery, if there was one running motif that the film plays with from beginning to end, it's water. Water is constantly used throughout the story. It rains when Utena and Toga first meet in the film. Anthe smashes a water pipe and forms a puddle that reflects hers and Utena's happiness as they dance through a starry night sky. It's even used suggestively.
Look at us, we're all soaked now.
Of course. You can't help but get wet in a pool.
Oh, Toga.
Water is a universal subject and it's imbued with meaning upon meaning. It's life-giving, it's sexual, it's purifying, it invokes self-reflectiveness. But it's also deadly. Though we might have an inkling of Toga's fate if we had seen the series, and we might also suspect that he had already died previously, the seeds of his demise by drowning was present almost from the start of the film.
For your high goals, my girl.
His death, though somewhat clumsily brought up by Utena, rhetorically asking herself how she could forget that he had drowned, completes Utena's arc. Because Toga winds up sacrificing himself to save Juri, his example, his princeliness, lives on through Utena. Because though the winter might be harsh and it might be cold, a bud will always have the chance to bloom again. It's actually kind of amazing to see how far Ikuhara stretched these motifs. He didn't leave a single stone unturned.
So that's why Utena went through a car wash and became a car. Because water.
Yeah, sure, if that's how you feel.
No, I'm curious. Why do you think she turned into a car?
Well, since you asked. Yes, the big meme about the film, even 20 years after the fact, is the ending with the goddamn car. Why, oh why, did Utena pull a Futurama and turn into a werecar with nary a silver potato in sight? Now, I can't speak for Ikuhara, nor can anyone else for that matter, but if I were to lay out what I think... Well, there's the structural reason why, which is to let the story have an exciting end. Ikuhara did mention that as a film he felt it needed an action-oriented climax, and even reached outside his team to hire animators whose wheelhouse was exactly that, all to help make the ending a reality. As much as it is a figurative act that Utena turns into a car, it does serve a narrative purpose. But metaphorically speaking, I don't think she turned into a car so much as she turned into a carriage. Like, beyond the fact that Revolutionary Girl Utena is a fairy tale in the most deconstructionist means possible, the car she turns into has horses formed into the fenders. I mean, if she turned into an actual horse-drawn carriage, it would be a bit on the nose, but the effect is still the same. Anthe and Utena racing away from the magical kingdom toward their happy ending, which they get, naked as the day they were born, racing toward a blighted landscape that seems worlds away from the fantastical Otori Academy. Not necessarily the most joyous of surroundings, but it's the world they chose for themselves. So yeah, it's a bit of misdirection, but I do think the effect is still there. What about you, Suave? What do you think of the scene?
Huh? Oh, sorry, Sage. You said naked as the day they were born, and well, one thing led to another. I'm sorry, you were saying?
Suave, I would be furious with you if you hadn't just brought up a good point.
I did?
Yes, actually. I mean, in your own way. I've been so preoccupied with Utena's use of abstract imagery and its cultural foundation that I have been neglecting its most defining characteristic, and one of the major reasons why it has such a stalwart fan base. Its queer representation. I mean, kind of hard to miss.
You're so funny, Miss Utena Tenjo.
Call me Utena.
Well, how do you do, Utena?
Alright, let's be real here. I'm not exactly the most ideal person to be leading a ham-handed discussion about queer representation in theory in shoujo-ai anime. But having said that, I do think that there is a broader message at play here. Of course, I don't mean to downplay or diminish the importance of the queer aspects of Utena, as it's practically synonymous with the franchise as a whole. Girls are kissing girls, and they're escaping a fabricated world of controlling and abusive men. Get used to it. What's more, I find it pretty refreshing that no one in the movie is getting miffed that a girl is going around fighting for the hand of a fair maiden and wearing the title prince while doing it. Say for Kyoichi, no one's hung up on Utena being a girl, and are more focused on who she is in relation to Anthe than her gender or sexuality. That she's a woman is of no consequence because the last thing the film needed to do is get bogged down in splitting hairs over if her second X chromosome precludes her from being a prince, a made-up title for an equally made-up hegemonic power structure.
Why are you dressed like that?
It's the prince. After we separated, I decided that I'd live with high goals.
But what intrigued me about Utena was that it approached queerness from a unique angle, and one that I think that anyone from any walk of life can appreciate. In the broadest sense possible, Revolutionary Girl Utena is about confinement and escaping it, and about adopting a role that was different than the one placed on you. It's just as much about growing up and having the strength to say who you are as it is about deconstructing magical girl anime tropes and other fairy tales. I mean, what is the story of Revolutionary Girl Utena but two women who are just trying to find their own happy ending in a world that won't let them have it? From a meta-narrative viewpoint, the ending of a castle literally crushing our heroines trying to escape it is almost obvious. It's as if the setting itself cannot abide its own characters wanting out of a story that they had no say in playing, all the while the ghost of a prince who never really was tempts them to continue the lie.
You don't have to be afraid anymore. Come back to that closed world where you can be a living corpse.
It may play directly to queer sensibilities, but the notion of wanting to live your own life, your own way, and pursue your own happiness, that's universal. At the center of this conflict is, of course, Anthony and Utena, but the roads that lead to this conflict start at different ends and meet in the middle. Utena, while more comfortable wearing boys' clothes, actively does not want to play the duelist game and claim her bride.
I told you yesterday, Anthe. I have no need for the Rose Bride.
Really?
Can you believe it, Anthe? This prince who's won you is so indifferent.
Indeed.
While Anthe's role as the Rose Bride seems second nature to her, to the point where it borders on Stockholm Syndrome, always quick to play the demure, agreeable bride even to despicable and abusive people. But just as Utena embraces the fact that she can be her own prince, does she guide Anthe to actualizing her own definition of happiness, free from anyone else's influence and sway. After all, it's not Utena that drives herself and Anthe toward their happy ending, because as the film is quick to point out,
A car without its key is stuck and goes to rust.
in the end, what Utena and Anthe define as themselves and their happiness is exclusively theirs to decide and theirs to make true. And that kind of optimistic message in the face of uncertainty and doubt is for everyone, especially a confused teenager who feels they don't belong for one reason or another. One should only hope that if they have to make such a hard journey towards self-actualization, that they won't have to do it alone. I guess what I took from Utena is that if we must play a role in the story of our lives and the lives of others, then only we should be able to choose what that role is. And I can't agree more. But I still feel like there's one last question left to answer. Do I like this movie? Yeah, I think I do. Because I had a lot of fun with it. To be fair though, my fun was had not so much watching the movie, but rather from thinking about the movie. I had fun wondering what Ikuhara was thinking when he did this, and when he did that. And that kind of engagement is what I'm looking for in a thoughtful movie. I didn't find the story itself engrossing, but again, it's Ikuhara's execution and flair that compelled me to keep watching. It's art for art's sake, and I can't help but love it for being what it is and doing it with such jubilant glee. It might not have hit a personal chord with me like it has with its fan base, but altogether, I'm glad I watched it. But you know, it has been quite a while since we actually talked about an honest-to-God anime TV series. And I do believe the climate is just right for a look back on a particular title. Till next time.